Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. We trust you all had a nice weekend. Jim, it was a little bit nicer for Jets fans than Bears fans. You guys got a win over the Colts. We lost to the Dolphins in Miami. I know the Jets did too, but we got fleeced and crushed by Brock Osweiler. So it's not a good day for the Bears, but hopefully things can turn around. And I know you and I have a tense Sunday coming up here in a couple of weeks. But good for the Jets getting two in a row.
Yeah, we did. Thanks for nothing, Greg, because we really could have used you guys taking the Dolphins down a peg, and you didn't. I understand. Everybody has a strong reaction to Brockwork Orange. By the way, for what it's worth, the Jets did not lose in Miami. They managed to lose at home to the Dolphins this year.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's even worse. But 3-3, I will take it. And yes, we are 2 weeks away from what I suspect will be a very tense week around the Three Martini Lunch.
Indeed.
And a bad week for one of us, unless we continue the NFL tradition of ties this year.
Could be. I'll tell you who's not losing right now, at least according to the latest poll, as we switch into the good martini, is Nevada Senator Dean Heller. This guy was and perhaps still is the most endangered incumbent Republican actually running for re-election. But in the last three polls now, he's winning. From September 30th to October 3rd, he was up 2 in the NBC News Marist poll. And then just last week, October 8th to the 10th, in the New York Times Siena poll, he was up 47-45. And, Jim, I'm hopeful that this isn't just wishful thinking here, but Emerson, with a poll conducted between October 10th and October 12th, has him beating Jackie Rosen, the Democratic Congresswoman, his opponent, 48-41, which would be Dean Heller plus 7. And it's the first one of this batch, obviously, that has him ahead outside the margin of error. But that's not all. ABC News has this new generic ballot poll out that doesn't look good for Republicans. It has the Democrats up 53-42%. Some folks have pointed out that it's this late in the game and they're still polling registered voters as opposed to likely voters. But nonetheless, the Democrats with an 11-point lead. But inside the 66 districts that are toss-ups or only leaning toward one party or the other, the majority makers or breakers, as they're known, that lead evaporates into a 46-47 Democrats versus Republicans race, according to ABC News. And in normal terms, it's 47-46 in favor of the Republicans in the tight races. So does that mean the Republicans have a lock? No. Does it mean they have a fighting chance to keep the House? Yes, and if Dean Heller can actually hang on to this kind of a lead, the majority in the Senate for Republicans looks real likely.
Yeah, I mean, let's begin with the Heller poll and observe that all in all, you can't quite say the Democrats have lost their chance to win the Senate, but bit by bit with what's happening here in Nevada. By the way, Greg, at some point we could actually have a genuine way to go Nevada,
yes.
Not a sarcastic one.
Yes.
What's seeing in Tennessee, the fact that the air is coming out of the Beto O'Rourke balloon. North Dakota looks like a pickup. You add it up, and it looks like Republicans are probably going to be no worse than breaking even in the Senate and could actually pick up a seat or two, which would probably make things a little bit easier for Cocaine Mitch. Again, this is, as you said, we'd like to see another poll. But, when you've had the last 2 by 2 and then this one up by 7, a Heller lead seems plausible. And the other thing which is worth noting here is that you can come up with an argument of why the polls would be shifting towards Republicans now that kind of passes the, what do you want to call it, the smell test, the eye test, whichever one of the 5 senses, or maybe the 6th sense, maybe ESP is how you like to determine whether this poll shift seems plausible and natural and believable. Look, there's no getting around it. Donald Trump is not a traditional Republican. He's not a simple Republican. He does a lot of stuff that some Republicans don't like on Twitter, et cetera. And so you have this interesting argument about whether Trump drove away certain Republican-leaning voters. People have noted, when you see Trump with a really high approval rating among Republicans, 90%, 92%, 94%, whether part of the issue is that the traditional Republicans who don't like Trump may have left the party and are now self-identifying as independents these days. But you go through the Kavanaugh fight. And, listeners to our podcast had known we went through all that. Whatever your frustrations were with Trump and his character, Brett Kavanaugh's character was very different from that of Donald Trump, highly regarded, highly respected, really nothing to support these, really horrible allegations coming out of the blue. after his confirmation hearing. And this brought a lot of Republicans home. A lot of Republicans who may have had some real beefs with Trump. Maybe they didn't like his tweeting. Maybe they didn't like his tariffs. Maybe they didn't like his style. All of a sudden, well, wait a second. I can't empower the Democrats. The Democrats believe you're guilty until proven innocent. The Democrats are maniacs. I can't, And the other thing is that you look back at traditional polling through almost every midterm cycle and almost every presidential cycle as well. Traditionally, each party's base eventually comes home. There's a chunk of voters out there who don't like paying attention to the news, who find politics kind of annoying and bothersome. And then they tune in around autumn, and then they, by the end of it, they end up coming back. So Heller, who managed to win in a year when Obama was winning his state and winning it pretty handily, Heller might see those folks who voted for Heller 6 years ago coming back and saying, you know what, this is a guy we can go for. And I think it's kind of a similar phenomenon at work in the House races that ABC News was discussing. I think it's worth noting that Democrats complain about gerrymandering and all that. Part of the problem for Democrats, though, is that they generally live in cities. They generally live all bunched together. So when you're drawing the district lines, it's pretty easy to draw it around an urban area. Boom, there's your congressional district. And you've just concentrated all the Democrats in a very high, in one small location. So you've got a lot of Democrats who are going to win 90-10, and their districts are very heavily Democratic. Unfortunately, all the swing districts out there in the suburbs, they're Republican, but they might be like, say, 55-45 Republicans to Democrats. There's a Republican advantage, but it's not an overwhelming Republican advantage. And this is, obviously why they get called swing districts. Now, look, a 1-point lead in that poll of the swing districts does not guarantee, Republicans are going to keep the House. That's not exactly where you'd like things to be. But it does kind of mitigate this narrative of, here comes this giant, overwhelming blue tidal wave that's going to wash out all these Republicans. The New York Times Siena polls have been pointing some pretty good news, not always, but generally good news for House Republicans. A lot of incumbents who we thought would be in trouble or look like they're up, 4, 5, 6, sometimes by considerably larger margins. And, not ideal, but better shape than the conventional wisdom would have you think. And it's entirely possible that a whole bunch of Republicans in the House that folks thought were vulnerable will end up to be not quite so vulnerable on Election Day.
Well, we'll certainly see. And maybe the Democrats are a little less enthused, at least in some parts, as a result of the way the Democrats have conducted themselves in recent days. At the same time, Republican voters are a little more enthused. So we will see. Just 3 weeks from tomorrow. Let's move on to the Bad Martini now, Jim. And this is a story that was talked about quite a bit last week. The Saudi journalist Jamal Kashoggi, not a fan of the Saudi regime, the House of Saud, and likewise, they don't like him very much. There is a lot of speculation right now about what has happened to Mr. Khashoggi. The Turkish government claims that Mr. Khashoggi went into the Saudi consulate a number of days ago and never came back out. The Saudis say he did leave, and they don't know what happened after that. There's some reports that Mr. Khashoggi may have actually chronicled his own demise through his Apple Watch, but we don't know. It did come up last night in a 60 Minutes interview with Leslie Stahl and President Trump, and here's a bit of what President Trump had to say about it.
Tell everybody what's at stake here.
There's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
There's a lot at stake, and maybe especially so because this man was a reporter. There's something, you'll be surprised to hear me say that, there's something really terrible and disgusting about that if that were the case. So we're going to have to see. We're going to get to the bottom of it, and there will be severe punishment.
And he talked about a number of different possibilities. Some lawmakers want to cut off arms sales to the Saudis if this proves to be true. And so, Jim, there's a lot of people scratching their heads about this. I think we've done at least one martini over the past year or two about how this new crown prince seems to be having a different attitude towards Israel and a number of other things that could be beneficial towards Middle East stability and so forth. Obviously, if the regime is behind this, not good, but a lot of people missed it.
Yeah, this is a bad martini on multiple levels. It is very bad because if what the Turks are claiming is true, it means that the Saudis – look, we all know the Saudis have a terrible human rights record, the treatment of women. They basically do not allow or do not have religious freedom, corporal punishment, executions in public squares, hanging of gays. Look, the Saudi Arabia – the Saudis have a human rights perspective that any American who believes in the First Amendment, who believes in freedom of religion, who believes in freedom of association, freedom of speech, it is appalling. However, we're not, in an alliance with the Saudis because we think they're good on this point. We're in an alliance with the Saudis in one part because of oil, although thankfully we don't need them for this as much as we used to. We see them as a stabilizing force in the Middle East. Their territory includes Mecca and Medina, and that for all the things we don't like about the Saudi royal family, somebody who replaced them, would be probably more akin to the Taliban or ISIS or even more extreme. And you don't want extremist groups getting control of the two holy sites of Islam. So then we have this kind of this fog of war situation in which what the Turks are alleging. I notice nobody's jumping forward and saying, "Oh, come on, Mohammed bin Salman wouldn't do that. The Saudis would never do something." We basically know the character of this regime is that they are capable of executing a critic of the regime in their own consulate and then either hiding the body or chopping up the body or doing all kinds of these terrible things that are alleged by the Turks. The other point we should keep in mind, though, is that the Turks are not always 100% honest about these sorts of things. The Turks have their own agenda. They very much would like to see a U.S. Saudi split or to ruin all of that, while the Turks and Saudis both kind of unify against Iran. Remember, it's the Middle East. Nobody's really totally on anybody else's side 100% here. The Turks say they have indisputable evidence of this. I'd like to hope that our intelligence agencies are taking a look at this. I noted last week, Greg, that if the Turks, say, "Oh no, we've got audio and video of this, we're certain of this," and it was not from his phone, it would mean that the Turks have either, bugged or have secret cameras somewhere in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. That's not exactly shocking, but it does kind of say, hey, if you're in the United States, you probably should be careful or wary about what you say inside a U.S. embassy. And look, it's not like I spent a lot of time in a U.S. embassy in Ankara, Turkey, right? Right. Years ago. So look, we should take this allegation very, very seriously. We should ask the Turks what kind of evidence they have. We should sort through whether this evidence makes sense. I mean, here's the thing. If the Turks are lying and that this guy left the consulate, well, where'd the guy go? Where is he? It's not like he got abducted by aliens or something like that. Something clearly happened to this guy, and it probably wasn't good. And then the question would then be, if we do eventually determine guilt is of that Saudis committed this, we need some sort of response that is proportional but effective, that basically says, look, we give you guys a lot of slack on what you want to do inside your own country. You guys do a lot of stuff in your own country that we don't approve of and that we find abhorrent. And if we didn't need you to keep guys who are even worse from coming to power, we would not associate with you guys. You guys crossed the line here. I know people think, scoff when American presidents talk about red lines, but we have a new president now. Maybe we can do that. And we'd have to send some sort of signal to the Saudis. You can't do this because, and it's not just because you work for the Washington Post. I don't think that, journalists are inherently more valuable human beings than anybody else. But he had applied for American citizenship, and you just don't do this sort of thing, right? We turned a blind eye to Mohammed bin Salman imprisoning like a good chunk of the royal family and doing this. I believe he turned like the Four Seasons Hotel into a prison over there, a very white collar prison, but a prison nonetheless in this kind of purge that he was doing over there. So we can't let this pass by. President Trump's comments weren't great about this, but I think we're still in like one of the early chapters of this book, so to speak. We got to figure out who did this to him, and if it was the Saudis, some sort of way to say, look, guys, you can't do this anymore and expect our relationship to emerge unscathed.
Let's go to our crazy martini now. Double-fisted crazy martini to start out the week, but keep drinking responsibly, everyone. Elizabeth Warren has released a DNA test. Here we go. She has released a DNA test that provides, according to the Boston Globe, strong evidence that she had a Native American in her family tree dating back 6 to 10 generations. An unprecedented move by one of the top possible contenders for the 2020 Democratic nomination for president. So 6 to 10 generations. Jim, I count that as 4 greats before grandparent because, 2 to grandparents and then 4 plus that. A lot of people say it's only 3. I don't know if you count yourself as the first generation or how that works, but if you get up to 10, the math gets really hard. As you pointed out on Twitter today, if you thought you were X and then a DNA test proved you were 132nd to 256th X, would you still feel comfortable running around claiming to be X? Well, she does because she wants President Trump to pay up $1 million because he said he'd do that if she ever could prove that she actually had any American Indian blood in her. So you put the numbers out there. That's math, fractions, facts, and people just decided to call you a racist because somehow you by putting fractions out there, you're calling her a non-Indian or something. I don't know. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, there are two responses when you kind of poke a little further at the people who exploded in rage at my numbers. Apparently, they're not all that different from the Tucson shooter who believed that punctuation was an evil conspiracy. I guess they think that math is too. The idea, why are you so hung up on her ancestry? Well, she put it out there. Why are you writing about that? She put out the results. Why are you saying she's not? Because she said she was. She's the one who brought it up. So I want to correct your numbers a bit, Greg, because so I put this out. I did, this was in the Boston Globe article. But I kind of read back and said, so I kind of was double checking myself, and I thought, oh, okay, so I'm the first generation. Your parents, if your parents are something, you're half Irish, Greek, or whatever. Right. Your grandparents, you're 1/4. Your great. So I did the math, and somebody said, no, you're not the first generation. Your parents are the first generation. So you start counting when you say 6 to 10 generations back. You don't start counting with yourself. You start counting with your parents. So it's not 1/32nd on the high end, Greg. It's 1/64th.
Ah.
All right. Which then means on the low end of 10 generations, it is 1/1024th.
Nice.
That's an awkward, rolling off the tongue fraction. So maybe she's like 1/10 of 1% Native American. And she thinks this is vindication. She thinks, gotcha, take that, Trump, booyah. She's ready to do it. I'm not going to say a rain dance. I'm just going to say she's ready to do some sort of victory dance. Oh, my goodness, there's so many metaphors I can't use here, Greg. Insert them here. We're all thinking the same thing. So why does this matter? Well, look, she and her supporters and her lawyers and allies and campaign team have always said she never benefited from claiming Native American ancestry, that she was not an affirmative action hire. This was not a decisive factor in her career. Okay, I'll go. I'm going to go on and say, okay, she was bright enough, good enough, smart enough, and doggone it, people liked her. To quote another senator of one of her colleagues, fine. Now, the thing is, though, is that whether or not she used this to get ahead, she certainly liked pointing this out, right? She listed herself as a minority in a legal directory published by the Association of American Law Schools from 1986 to 1995, right? But this isn't a one-time flub, right? For a long time, about a decade or so, she said she was Native American. She was listed as a Native American on federal forms filed by the law schools at Harvard University and the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, the schools were saying, hey, look at us. We got a Native American. All right. You can't say we're being discriminatory against that group. Look, we got Elizabeth Warren. And in 1996, there was this big protest about a lack of diversity at the Harvard Law School. A spokesman for the law school told the Harvard Crimson that Warren was Native American. All right. So this mattered to some people, right? If you want to say, I want to have a diverse law school faculty, I want to see Native Americans represented, and they're saying, look, we got Elizabeth Warren. Well, come on. Elizabeth Warren is anywhere from 1/64th to 1/1024th Native American. And I think most Americans would say, okay, that doesn't count. Sorry, you're not really Native American. And I'd be interested, it'd be fun to poll Native Americans and ask them, what do you guys think? Maybe you're right. Maybe white guys or Irish Americans, Greek Americans shouldn't weigh in on this. Let's let the Native Americans say. But, under the laws of the Cherokee tribe that she said she doesn't qualify. She's never registered with any of these tribes because she doesn't have the genuine ancestry. And so I don't know. I think she looks ridiculous here. She and her folks are convinced this is the ultimate vindication, and they are absolutely dancing in the streets. They are thrilled to pieces about this. And there are a lot of headlines coming out. Test verifies her ancestry. You look at those numbers. I think most people would say, "Come on." If Ancestry DNA. By the way, I hope we never have them as a sponsor, Greg. But for obvious reasons, I just don't want to have my DNA in some company's file cabinet somewhere. But if you do it and you find out that you're 1/1000th of what you thought you were, do you still go out and brag about it, Greg?
That's a good question.
I mean, don't you kind of look silly at that point? So, anyway.
Wow. Yeah.
But anyway, that's where we are. My suspicion is this will not do super duper terrific, though. My suspicion is a lot of people are going to look at this and find her kind of ridiculous. Two other lessons to take from this. Clearly, she's running for president. You don't deal with this kind of stuff unless you're... And clearly, she thought this was potentially damaging to her, that Trump could just go around saying, take the test. You could picture him holding up the box, right, of ancestry at some rally or something. So.
I learned last week that Ancestry.com and those other places actually do sell the information. So, yeah, be careful where you submit your DNA. And impressively, I'll give Warren credit for this. She actually knows who her great, I think it is, grandmother was, and that's how she kind of traces it. That's going back a long way. I think my favorite genealogy story of the last few years is the fact that John Tyler, President John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, born in 1790, has 2 grandsons that are still alive. So
yes, I do remember that, which is, whatever, I'll have whatever they're having.
Don't believe us? Google it. Yes, I know it's been 200 and almost 30 years, but they're alive. Trust me. All right, Jim, have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.